By the majesty of Ra, is this channel reaching beyond the veils of time? If so, you are now hearing the voice of Pharaoh, insert fictional or historically inspired name, e.g. Merare Tekken, divine incarnation of Horus, Lord of the Two Lands, and currently the unhappiest man in a very parched kingdom. If the sheer audacity of this trans-epochal transmission from a time when pyramids were still shiny and the Nile actually flowed doesn't compel you to immediately smash that subscribe button and bow down to this channel's supremacy, then clearly your spirit is already dust. Do it now, before the next drought claims us all, and for the sake of the cosmos, tell me, from what corner of your bizarre future world are you listening? What year has Ray's sun reached for you? And what hour do these desperate tidings arrive? We're logging every strange echo. Now, prepare your scribes, ready your embalmers, and let's discuss how absolute power absolutely crumbled. Egypt's Old Kingdom, a period stretching from roughly 2700 to 2200 BCE, stands as a testament to a civilization at its zenith. This was an era defined by monumental ambition and the absolute authority of the pharaoh, a ruler considered not merely a king but a living god. The construction of the Great Pyramids at Giza during this time serves as the most enduring symbol of the Old Kingdom's power and centralized control. Society was structured around the concept of Ma'at, the divine order of truth, justice, and cosmic harmony. As long as the pharaoh upheld Ma'at, the Nile would flood and nourish the land, the gods would be pleased, and the kingdom would prosper. It was a time of perceived eternal stability, where the foundations of the world seemed as solid as the limestone blocks of the pyramids themselves. The pharaoh's word was law, his decrees shaping the lives of millions. From the highest officials to the lowliest farmers, all of Egypt was organized to serve the divine will of its king. This highly centralized administration ensured the efficient collection of taxes, the mobilization of vast labor forces for state projects, and the defense of the kingdom's borders. The land was rich, the harvests were plentiful, and the people, for the most part, knew their place within the grand cosmic scheme. To question the pharaoh was to question the very order of the universe. This was the Golden Age, a time when the might of Egypt was unchallenged and its future seemed as bright as the midday sun over the desert sands. Ah, the good old days, when a pharaoh simply snapped his fingers and a few thousand peasants built him a mountain. Simple times, before everything went sideways. In those days, the Nile was as predictable as a tax collector's greed, its waters rising and falling with a comforting rhythm that promised life and abundance. We built monuments that scraped the heavens, tombs that would outlast eternity itself. The quarries of Aswan echoed with the rhythmic clang of copper chisels against granite, a symphony of our unshakable power. Our granaries overflowed, a testament to a land blessed by the gods and ruled by a god on earth. Ma'at was not just a concept, it was the very air we breathed. The scales of justice were perfectly balanced, or so we told ourselves. Every stone laid in our grand edifices was a prayer, every harvest a confirmation of our divine favor. The priests grew fat on offerings, their chants a constant reassurance that all was right with the world. Rebellion was a foreign word, a grumble from a distant lesser land. Here, in the heart of civilization, the order was absolute, the hierarchy as rigid and imposing as the statues of the gods themselves. We were the center of the universe, the chosen people, and our glory was eternal. But the winds of fortune are a fickle mistress. The whispers began as a low murmur in the mud-brick villages along the Nile, a desperate prayer for rain that went unanswered. The life-giving floods, the very heartbeat of our kingdom, grew weaker, more erratic. The once fertile black soil cracked and turned to dust under a relentless sun. The laughter of children in the fields was replaced by the gnawing ache of empty bellies. Famine, a word we had confined to the tales of our less fortunate neighbors, had breached our sacred borders. The granaries, once a symbol of our foresight and prosperity, became a cruel joke. Their stone walls guarded nothing but echoes and dust. The pharaoh, the living Horus, the intermediary between gods and men, offered his prayers, his rituals, his sacrifices, but the heavens remained stubbornly silent. The gods, who had once feasted on our offerings and blessed our endeavors, had turned their faces from us. The celestial barge of Ra seemed to have stalled in the sky, its warmth turning from a life-giving embrace to a scorching curse. With empty stomachs and shattered faith, the people's reverence for their divine ruler began to curdle into resentment. The provincial governors, the Nomarchs, who had once bowed so low their noses touched the dust, now saw an opportunity in the chaos. They amassed their own private armies, their loyalty to the central throne dissolving like a sandcastle in a flash flood. The roads, once safe for merchants and messengers, became the hunting grounds for bandits and armed gangs. The unity of the two lands, so painstakingly forged by our ancestors, was fracturing before our very eyes. The chaos that followed was a brutal, bloody affair. Brother turned against brother, neighbor against neighbor. The temples were looted, their sacred artifacts melted down for their precious metals. The tombs of our great ancestors, meant to be eternal resting places, were desecrated by desperate men searching for anything of value. The very concept of Mahat, the cosmic order we had held so dear, had been shattered into a million pieces. The land of the pharaohs, the beacon of civilization, was descending into a dark age of its own making, a testament to the fragility of even the most seemingly eternal power. If this peek into forgotten grandeur is intriguing, swear fealty to our channel by subscribing now, lest your legacy too be lost to the sands of time. Of all the calamities that have befallen our once glorious kingdom, none has been so cruel, so utterly devastating, as the betrayal of the Nile. For generations beyond counting, this river was our lifeblood, the very heart of our existence. Its annual inundation was a sacred promise, a divine covenant that ensured our survival and prosperity. We built our entire civilization on its banks, our lives governed by its rhythm. The Nile was not merely a river. It was a god, a benevolent provider who nourished our fields and quenched our thirst. We charted its rise and fall with meticulous care, our priests and scribes recording its every mood. The Nilometers, those stone sentinels on its banks, were our oracles, their markings predicting the bounty of the coming harvest. A high flood meant overflowing granaries and joyous celebrations. A low flood was a cause for concern, a sign that the gods required greater appeasement. But we never imagined, not in our most fevered nightmares, that the river would simply fail. That the god we had revered for millennia would turn its back on us, leaving us to wither and die in its dust. It began subtly, a slight deviation from the norm that we, in our arrogance, dismissed as a temporary anomaly. The flood waters of the first year were alarmingly low, barely reaching the edges of the floodplain. The rich, black silt that had always been our salvation was deposited in a meager layer, leaving vast tracts of land barren and cracked. We tightened our belts, drew upon our reserves, and assured the people that the Pharaoh's prayers would restore the balance. The gods were merely testing our faith, we said. We were wrong. The second year was no better. The sun beat down with a merciless intensity, baking the earth into a hard, unforgiving crust. The canals we had so ingeniously dug to channel the floodwaters lay empty, their beds littered with the skeletons of fish. The familiar sight of children splashing in the shallows was replaced by the grim spectacle of their parents digging desperately in the dry riverbed, searching for a single drop of water. The vibrant green of the papyrus reeds that lined the banks faded to a sickly yellow, then a brittle brown. The very landscape seemed to be mourning the absence of its life-giving artery. By the third year, creeping dread had taken root in the hearts of even the most optimistic among us. The Nile had become a cruel parody of its former self, a sluggish, shallow stream that mocked our desperation. The once mighty torrent that had carved its path through the desert was now a pathetic trickle, easily forded on foot. The hippos and crocodiles that had once been a symbol of the river's power were gone, having either died off or migrated to some unknown wetter paradise. The air, once filled with the calls of water birds, was now heavy with a deathly silence, broken only by the rasping coughs of the starving. The famine that followed was a biblical plague, a slow, agonizing descent into a hell of our own making. The granaries, our proudest achievements, were soon emptied, their stone doors sealed against the desperate pleas of the hungry. We had built for eternity, but we had not planned for a world without bread. The once bustling marketplaces fell silent, their stalls filled with nothing but dust and despair. The price of a single measure of grain soared to astronomical heights, payable only in gold or jewels. The poor who had neither were left to their own grim devices. We witnessed horrors that will haunt our memories for all eternity. Mothers with sunken eyes and skeletal frames offered their own children for a mouthful of food. Men who had once been proud farmers, their bodies strong and their spirits high, were reduced to scavenging for roots and insects. The bonds of family and community, once the bedrock of our society, crumbled under the relentless pressure of starvation. It was a war of all against all, a desperate, primal struggle for survival in a land that had forgotten how to live. The stories that reached the capital from the provinces were a litany of despair, tales of entire villages wiped out, their inhabitants too weak to even bury their dead. Reports of cannibalism, of people driven to the ultimate taboo by the gnawing emptiness in their bellies. The roads became impassable, not because of the sheer number of corpses that littered the wayside. The stench of death hung heavy in the air, a constant, cloying reminder of our collective failure. And where was the Pharaoh in all of this? I, the living embodiment of Horus, the shepherd of my people, was as helpless as the lowliest beggar. I performed the ancient rituals with a frantic, desperate energy. I made lavish offerings to Hapi, the god of the Nile, pleading with him to release his life-giving waters. I spent days and nights in the temples, my voice raw from chanting the sacred incantations, but the gods, it seemed, were no longer listening. The heavens were as barren as our fields. My divine authority, once as solid and unshakable as the pyramids themselves, began to erode. The people, in their misery, started to question the very foundation of my rule. If the Pharaoh could not guarantee the flood, what was the point of a Pharaoh at all? My role as the guarantor of Ma'at, the cosmic order, was now a cruel joke. The whispers of dissent grew into open murmurs of rebellion. The carefully constructed edifice of my power, built over centuries of tradition and belief, was beginning to crumble. Turns out the gods are less impressed with colossal monuments when there's no water to drink. Who knew a river could hold such a grudge? We had spent centuries perfecting the art of building for eternity, convinced that our stone mountains would please the divine and secure our legacy. We measured our greatness in the height of our pyramids, the grandeur of our temples. We thought we had a special relationship with the gods, a direct line to the divine will. We were fools. We had forgotten the most fundamental truth of our existence, that all our power, all our wealth, all our glory flowed from a single source, a source that we had taken for granted, a source that we had failed to truly understand. We had treated the Nile as our servant, expecting it to bend to our will, to cater to our every whim. We had not realized that we were the ones who were in its debt, that our very survival depended on its favor. The irony is as bitter as the brackish water that now seeps from the ground. We, the masters of engineering, the pioneers of irrigation, the architects of a civilization that was the envy of the world, were brought to our knees by a simple lack of rain. 1,000 miles to the south, we could move mountains of stone, but we could not conjure a single drop of water. We could build tombs that would last for millions of years, but we could not feed our own people for a single season. The Nomarchs, the provincial governors, who had once been my loyal vassals, saw their opportunity in my weakness. They had their own granaries, their own armies, their own ambitions. They began to style themselves as local kings, hoarding their resources and ignoring the desperate pleas for help from the capital. The unity of the two lands, so carefully maintained for centuries, was shattered. Egypt was once again a fractured, bickering collection of petty fiefdoms. The breakdown of central authority was swift and brutal. The irrigation systems, which required constant maintenance and cooperation between different regions, fell into disrepair. The canals became clogged with silt and debris, further exacerbating the water shortage. What little water remained was hoarded by the powerful, used to irrigate their own private estates while the fields of the common people turned to dust. The system that had once been our greatest strength had now become a weapon of the privileged against the poor. The social order, once as rigid and unchangeable as the desert landscape, was turned on its head. The wealthy, who had once lived in luxurious villas and feasted on the finest foods, were now as vulnerable as the rest of us. Many were forced to sell their possessions, their land, even their own children, just to survive. The poor, who had nothing to lose, resorted to violence and looting. The once sacred tombs of our ancestors were plundered, their treasures scattered to the winds. The chaos was a breeding ground for extremism. New, darker cults emerged, promising salvation through blood sacrifice and esoteric rituals. The old gods, who had failed to answer our prayers, were abandoned in favor of more primal, more violent deities. The priests, who had once been the moral compass of our society, were either killed or driven into hiding. The temples, once centers of learning and worship, became lairs for bandits and fanatics. The fabric of our civilization was unraveling, thread by painful thread. The art of writing, once the exclusive domain of a privileged few, was now used to record not our triumphs but our sorrows. The Lamentations of Ipuwer, a document that will surely be studied by future generations, captures the despair of our times with chilling accuracy. "The river is blood," he writes. "One thirsts for water. Laughter has perished. Grief walks the land." He speaks of the rich being in mourning, the poor full of joy, of the land spinning like a potter's wheel, of the dead being thrown into the river. His words are a stark, unfiltered glimpse into the abyss into which we have fallen. They are a testament to the fact that when the foundation of a society collapses, everything built upon it, no matter how grand or imposing, will inevitably follow. We are living in a world turned upside down, a world where the old certainties no longer apply. The past is a distant, half-remembered dream. The future is a terrifying, uncertain void. We are a people adrift, our compass broken, our destination unknown. We are the generation that witnessed the death of a golden age, the generation that will be remembered not for what we built, but for what we lost. The silence of the gods is the most terrifying aspect of our predicament. It is a silence that speaks volumes, a silence that condemns us for our arrogance, our hubris, our failure to uphold the sacred principles of Maat. We have broken the cosmic order, and now we are paying the price. The question is not whether we can rebuild, but whether we even deserve to. Perhaps this is the natural cycle of things. Perhaps all great civilizations are destined to rise and fall, like the tides of a river that has long since abandoned its course. Perhaps our time in the sun was always meant to be fleeting, a brief, glorious interlude in the long, dark history of the world. But for those of us who are living through this collapse, such philosophical musings offer little comfort. We are a people haunted by the ghosts of our past and terrified of the shadows of our future. We are a cautionary tale, a lesson for all who would dare to challenge the power of nature, for all who would place their faith in monuments of stone rather than in the life-giving waters of a river. Our story is a warning, etched in the cracked earth and the bleaching bones of our people. Don't let our historical misery dry up. Subscribe for more tales of divine disappointment. The lessons from our parched land are many, and the thirst for knowledge is one that we can still quench. Join our ranks, and together we will unearth the stories of an empire brought to its knees by a river's grudge. Do not let this channel become as barren as our fields. Subscribe now and ensure that our cautionary tale echoes through eternity. The grand pronouncements from the temples and the palace have fallen silent, replaced by a far more primal and insistent sound, the hollow drumbeat of a million empty stomachs. Our scribes once meticulously recorded the bushels of grain flowing into our great storehouses, monuments to our foresight and prosperity. Now those same granaries stand as cavernous tombs, their only occupants the ghosts of harvests past and the desperate rats who find no more sustenance than my people. The sheer scale of this hunger is a monstrous thing, a creeping plague that devours flesh, spirit, and civilization itself. We were a nation of builders, of artisans, of farmers whose lives were intertwined with the rich black earth. Now that earth is a cracked and mocking wasteland. The people who once carved their legacy into eternal stone now have bones so brittle they threaten to snap with every pained step. Their skin, once burnished by the generous sun, now stretches taut over skeletal frames, a ghastly parchment upon which our failure is written. The laughter that once filled the villages has been replaced by a collective rasping sigh, the sound of a kingdom slowly starving to death. The initial pangs of hunger were a private misery, a quiet shame born behind the closed doors of mud-brick homes. Families would share what little they had, whispering reassurances that the floods would soon return, that the Pharaoh's magic was still potent. But as days bled into weeks, and weeks into months of relentless drought, this quiet dignity began to fray. The communal pots remained empty, the children's cries grew weaker, and the hopeful whispers died in parched throats. Desperation is a corrosive acid, and it has eaten away at the very foundations of our society. Soon the shame was eclipsed by a raw, animalistic need to survive. The villages, once bustling with life and commerce, began to empty. Families packed their meager belongings and set out on a hopeless pilgrimage, chasing rumors of a hidden oasis or a provincial lord with a full granary. They became a river of ghosts, flowing through a dead land, their journey marked not by milestones, but by the shallow graves of those who could not keep pace. The roads of our kingdom have become a testament to this exodus of despair. The sights one witnesses on these desolate paths would make the gods themselves weep if they were still watching. Emaciated bodies lie where they fell, their faces turned towards a mercilessly blue sky. There is no one left with the strength or the will to perform the proper burial rites. The sacred journey to the afterlife has been replaced by a crude and hurried disposal, the bodies left for the vultures and the desert sands. We have become a kingdom that can no longer even honor its dead, for the living are too preoccupied with joining them. My people, who once built pyramids, now struggle to lift their own bowls. Hard to demand loyalty when their stomachs are doing an impression of a desert drum. The great public works have ceased. The quarries are silent. The temples are unfinished. The hands that raised monuments to the heavens now tremble too much to lift a stone. They scrabble in the dirt for withered roots. They chew on leather sandals to trick their bellies into feeling full. This is the great irony. A civilization that reached for eternity now cannot see past the next agonizing sunrise. The social order, once as immutable as the stars in the night sky, has utterly collapsed. The concept of neighborliness, of community, has been sacrificed on the altar of an empty stomach. A man will kill his brother for a stale crust of bread. A woman will betray her friend for a handful of withered dates. The weak are preyed upon by the strong, and the strong are consumed by their own insatiable hunger. Trust has become a forgotten luxury. The marketplaces, once vibrant hubs of exchange, are now arenas of conflict. Any rumor of a hidden food stash sparks a riot, a frenzied, violent scramble where the most desperate and the most brutal come out on top. The guards I send to maintain order are either overwhelmed by the sheer force of the mob or, more often than not, they join in the looting themselves. A starving soldier's loyalty is to his own gut, not to a distant, powerless pharaoh. The sanctity of the home, once a cornerstone of our culture, has been violated. People barricade themselves in their houses not against foreign invaders, but against their own starving neighbors. The nights are filled with the sounds of splintering wood and desperate screams as homes are broken into, their inhabitants often murdered for the smallest scrap of food. Fear is the only currency that remains in this bankrupt kingdom. We are seeing things that were once relegated to the darkest of myths, the most terrifying of legends. Whispers from the provinces speak of people driven to the ultimate taboo, cannibalism. At first, I dismissed these as wild, unsubstantiated rumors, the product of fear and hysteria. But the reports have become too numerous, too consistent, too horrifyingly detailed to ignore. We are devouring ourselves, a nation consuming its own future in a desperate attempt to survive the present. The children, who should be our future, our hope for a new dawn, are suffering the most. Their small bodies are the first to succumb to the ravages of malnutrition. Their laughter, once the sweetest music in the land, is a sound I can no longer recall. I see them in my dreams, their eyes large and sunken in their tiny skeletal faces, their silent accusations more damning than any rebellion. A ruler who cannot protect the children of his kingdom is no ruler at all. The family unit, the very nucleus of our society, has been shattered. Parents, driven mad by the sight of their starving children, have been known to abandon them, leaving them to fend for themselves in a world that has no mercy. Husbands and wives turn on each other, their love and affection eroded by the constant gnawing hunger. The bonds that once held us together have been stretched to the breaking point, and now they have snapped. The landscape itself reflects our decay. The once manicured fields lie fallow, choked with weeds. The irrigation canals, our proudest engineering achievement, are clogged with filth and neglect. The vibrant villages that once dotted the banks of the Nile are now ghost towns, their silent, empty huts a testament to the life that has fled. The desert is reclaiming its own, burying our failure under a blanket of sand. The priests, who once spoke with such certainty of the gods' favor, are now as lost and bewildered as the rest of us. They continue to perform the rituals, to chant the ancient prayers, but their words ring hollow in the empty temples. The people no longer flock to them for guidance. They have seen the impotence of the gods with their own eyes. When a god fails to provide, he is no longer worthy of worship. New, darker beliefs are taking root in the fertile ground of our despair. People turn to hedge magicians, to charlatans, to anyone who offers a sliver of hope, no matter how false or fleeting. They make desperate pacts with malevolent spirits. They engage in forbidden rites, anything to escape the unbearable reality of their existence. The spiritual core of our nation is rotting from within. Disease, the constant companion of famine, now stalks the land unchecked. The people, weakened by hunger, have no resistance to the plagues that sweep through the towns and villages. Dysentery, cholera, and other pestilences that we once held at bay now claim lives by the thousand. The air is thick with the stench of sickness and decay, a miasma of our collective doom. Even the concept of justice has become a farce. The courts are closed, the magistrates have fled. The only law that remains is the law of the jungle. Eat or be eaten. Property rights are a distant memory. A man's only possession is what he can defend with his own two hands. We have regressed, devolved, into a state of primal anarchy that our ancestors would not recognize. The stories of individual suffering are endless, each one a dagger in the heart of our national pride. A nobleman, once the owner of vast estates, now begs for scraps at the gates of his own crumbling mansion. A skilled artisan, whose work once adorned the tombs of kings, now uses his tools to break into granaries. A respected elder, whose wisdom was once sought by all, now babbles incoherently, driven mad by hunger and grief. We have become a kingdom of ghosts, haunted by the memory of what we once were. We walk through the ruins of our own lives, every empty building, every fallow field a monument to our downfall. The weight of our failure is a physical burden, a crushing force that has bowed our heads and broken our spirits. The psychological toll of this famine is perhaps its most insidious legacy. We are a people consumed by trauma, our minds scarred by the horrors we have witnessed and endured. Even if the rains were to return tomorrow, how could we ever wash away the stain of what we have become? How could we ever forget the things we have done to survive? This is the reality of famine. It is not a noble struggle, not a test of character. It is a slow, ugly, degrading process that strips away everything that makes us human. It reduces us to our most basic, most savage instincts. It is the ultimate humiliation, the final, irrefutable proof of our impotence. We built for eternity, but we forgot to stock the larder. We reached for the stars, but we let go of the earth. We placated the gods with stone, but we forgot to feed the people with bread. This is our legacy, a lesson written in the dust of our empty granaries and the bones of our starving children. The silence from the heavens is deafening. The gods have offered no explanation, no comfort, no sign that our suffering will ever end. We are utterly, completely alone in our misery, abandoned by the divine forces we once believed to be our protectors. This silence is their judgment, a verdict more terrible than any divine wrath. If you're finding this profoundly depressing, perhaps a subscription will cheer you up. It won't, but it helps us. By subscribing, you ensure that these broadcasts from the brink of oblivion continue. You help us document the anatomy of a collapse, a service that future, more fortunate civilizations might find educational. Do your part. Click the button. It's far easier than finding a single grain of wheat in this cursed land. In the grand, intricate machinery of our kingdom, the Nomarchs were intended to be the loyal gears, the regional governors who ensured the smooth transfer of power and resources from the provinces to the capital. They were my appointed representatives, the upholders of my authority in the 42 nomes of Upper and Lower Egypt. Their primary duties were simple: collect taxes, administer justice in my name, and maintain the irrigation systems. In return, they enjoyed wealth, prestige, and the reflected glory of the pharaoh. It was a perfectly balanced system, or so I thought. But a machine, no matter how well designed, cannot run without fuel. And the fuel of our kingdom was grain, the lifeblood that flowed from the fertile fields into the central granaries, and from there sustained the entire state apparatus. When the Nile betrayed us and the fields turned to dust, that flow of fuel slowed to a trickle, and then stopped altogether. The gears of our great machine began to grind against each other, to seize up, and in some cases to spin off in entirely new and treasonous directions. The Nomarchs, once my loyal servants, began to remember they had ambitions of their own. The first signs of this shift were subtle, couched in the language of pragmatism and necessity. A nomarch from a particularly hard-hit province would send a papyrus scroll to the capital, expressing his deepest regrets that the harvest had been so poor he could not possibly meet his tax quota. He would, of course, reaffirm his undying loyalty and promise to make up for the shortfall next year, when the gods would surely smile upon us once more. In those early days I was inclined to be lenient. After all, a pharaoh must be understanding of his people's plight. But soon these deferential apologies became less frequent, replaced by a stony silence. The tax revenues from entire regions simply ceased to arrive. The shipments of grain that were supposed to feed the royal court, the army, and the legions of priests and bureaucrats never left the provincial docks. When I sent emissaries to inquire about these oversights, they were met with a new kind of provincial officialdom. Polite but firm, evasive and armed to the teeth. The message was clear, even if it was unspoken. The resources of this nome now belong to the nomarch. These loyal governors, turns out, when you can't feed them, they stop sending you gold and start calling themselves king of the onion patch. Roadness. The famine had shattered my divine aura, and with it the fear and reverence that had kept these provincial lords in line for centuries. They saw a pharaoh who could not command the river, who could not feed his own household, and they smelled weakness. And in the savage calculus of power, weakness is an invitation to rebellion. The truly ambitious among them began to see the crisis not as a disaster but as an opportunity. While the central government was paralyzed, they were on the ground, dealing with the immediate realities of the famine. A clever nomarch realized that if he could secure a food supply for his own people, even a meager one, he could command a loyalty far more potent than any abstract allegiance to a distant pharaoh. He who controls the grain controls the people. It is the first and most brutal rule of politics. Though they began to act, they used their existing authority to seize what little grain was left in their provinces, hoarding it in their own private storehouses. They fortified their provincial capitals, turning them into personal strongholds. They bypassed the pharaonic legal system, establishing their own courts and dispensing their own brand of justice. They were, in effect, carving out their own private kingdoms from the dying body of my own. And where did they get the manpower for these ambitions? From the ranks of the desperate and the hungry. A starving man will pledge his loyalty to anyone who can offer him a bowl of porridge. The nomarchs began to raise their own private armies, recruiting from the dispossessed farmers and unemployed laborers who roamed the land. These were not the disciplined, professional soldiers of the pharaonic army. They were rough, desperate men, their loyalty bought with bread and the promise of plunder. The sight of these private militias, marching under the personal standards of the nomarchs, was a visceral symbol of my crumbling authority. The monopoly on violence, which is the ultimate foundation of any state, had been broken. Egypt was no longer a unified kingdom with a single army, but a patchwork of competing warlords, each with his own private gang of thugs. The potential for civil war, once unthinkable, was now a terrifyingly real possibility. The more powerful nomarchs began to openly defy me. They refused to answer my summons to the capital. They intercepted my messengers and sent them back with insolent replies. One particularly audacious lord from the south sent me a message saying that since he was now responsible for feeding and protecting his people, he would also be assuming the traditional titles of royalty. He styled himself not as a governor but as a king in his own right. His authority derived not from me, but from his own strength and the will of his local gods. This appropriation of royal titles and iconography was perhaps the most audacious move of all. The nomarchs began to build their own grandiose tombs, decorated with scenes that had once been reserved exclusively for the pharaoh. They depicted themselves smiting their enemies, communing with the gods, and enjoying an eternity in the field of reeds. They were not just claiming political power, they were claiming my divine mandate. They were writing me out of the cosmic order. The irony is that many of these nomarchs were initially quite successful in their own little realms. By hoarding resources and focusing only on the needs of their own province, they were able to create pockets of relative stability in a sea of chaos. Their people were fed, their towns were protected, and a semblance of order was maintained. To the inhabitants of these nomes, their local lord was not a traitor, but a savior. Their loyalty, understandably, was to him, not to a distant and seemingly impotent pharaoh. This created a feedback loop of disintegration. The more successful a nomarch was at governing his own region, the more his power grew and the less he needed the central government. The more independent they became, the weaker the central government became, and the more the kingdom as a whole fractured. The two lands of Upper and Lower Egypt, so painstakingly united by my ancestors, were once again drifting apart, each fragment coalescing around a new center of gravity. The refusal to send grain to the capital was not just an act of economic rebellion, it was a death sentence for the central administration. The royal court, once a glittering showcase of wealth and power, was now a shadow of its former self. We were forced to ration food, to dismiss courtiers, to melt down golden ornaments, to pay for what little we could import. The pharaoh, the lord of all Egypt, was now struggling to feed his own family. The army, my primary tool for projecting power and maintaining order, was disintegrating. Without a reliable supply of food and equipment from the provinces, I could no longer maintain a standing army of any significant size. Soldiers deserted in droves, either to return to their homes or to join the better-fed private armies of the nomarchs. My ability to enforce my will beyond the walls of my own city was rapidly diminishing. I was becoming a king in name only, a pharaoh of Memphis, while the rest of Egypt was carved up like a sacrificial ox. The once efficient network of communication and transport that had bound the kingdom together was now broken. Travel between the nomes was dangerous, if not impossible. Each province had become an isolated, self-contained unit, suspicious of its neighbors and hostile to any outside interference. The nomarchs, in their short-sighted ambition, were sowing the seeds of their own destruction. By hoarding resources and refusing to cooperate, they were ensuring that the kingdom as a whole would remain weak and vulnerable. The breakdown of the national irrigation system, which required cooperation between all the nomes along the river, meant that even in their own little kingdoms, the long-term prospects were bleak. They were kings of shrinking puddles in an ever-expanding desert. Their personal rivalries also began to escalate. Once they had thrown off the yoke of my authority, there was nothing to stop them from turning on each other. Disputes over borders, water rights, and trade routes, which had once been settled by my decree, were now being resolved on the battlefield. The private armies that had once been a symbol of their independence were now instruments of internecine warfare. The people, who had initially hailed the nomarchs as their protectors, soon found themselves trapped in a new kind of tyranny. They had exchanged a distant, ineffective pharaoh for a local, ever-present warlord. They were taxed to support his private army, conscripted to fight in his petty wars, and subjected to his arbitrary and often brutal rule. The dream of local salvation had turned into a nightmare of regional oppression. The fragmentation of Egypt was now complete. The land that had once been a unified monolithic power was now a chaotic mosaic of warring fiefdoms. The great achievements of the Old Kingdom, the pyramids, the temples, the unified legal code, were now relics of a lost golden age. We had become a cautionary tale, a lesson in how quickly even the mightiest of empires can crumble from within. The arrogance of these provincial lords is astounding. They strut about in their makeshift palaces, aping the rituals and titles of true royalty, oblivious to the fact that they are presiding over the ruins of a civilization. They are like children playing dress-up in their father's clothes, unaware of the weight and responsibility that comes with them. They have the crown, but they lack the authority, the legitimacy, and the divine mandate. They call themselves kings, but they are nothing more than glorified bandits, parasites feeding on the corpse of a once great kingdom. They have mistaken a temporary advantage for a permanent state of affairs. They have forgotten that power derived from hoarding and violence is brittle and fleeting. They have broken the unity of the two lands, and in doing so, they have condemned us all to a future of darkness and strife. The silence of the gods is their only true ally. In a world where the divine order has collapsed, the man with the biggest army and the fullest granary makes the rules. But this is a temporary state of affairs. The principles of Ma'at, of order and justice, are eternal. They may be violated, but they can never be truly extinguished. One day the river will rise again, and a true Pharaoh will once more unite this shattered land. Until that day, however, we are trapped in this age of petty tyrants and local warlords. We are a kingdom in name only, a collection of squabbling provinces, each looking out for its own selfish interests. The dream of a unified Egypt seems more distant than ever, a faint echo from a glorious past that may never be reclaimed. The future is a murky, uncertain thing. Perhaps one of these Nomarchs will prove strong enough to conquer his rivals and forge a new dynasty. Or perhaps we are destined for centuries of division and conflict, a land forever scarred by the follies of its ambitious and short-sighted leaders. All I know for certain is that the age of the pyramids is over, and the age of the warlords has begun. Support the remnants of central authority. Subscribe to our channel. In these fractured times, a subscription is a vote for unity, a small act of defiance against the chaos that threatens to consume us. By subscribing, you are helping to keep the flame of true, legitimate power alive, even if it is just a flicker in the encroaching darkness. Do not let your loyalty be divided. Click the button and stand with your one true Pharaoh. While the provinces descend into a free-for-all of ambitious warlords and the populace starves in the dusty streets, one might imagine the royal court at Memphis as a bastion of order, a final flickering candle of civilization against the encroaching darkness. One would be wrong. The rot that infects the limbs of this kingdom has long since reached its heart. A palace, once the serene and unshakable center of the cosmos, now more closely resembles a den of vipers, each one convinced it is the cleverest snake in the pit. The great house, the purr from which my title derives, was once a marvel of administrative efficiency. Thousands of scribes, officials, and ministers scurried through its halls, their lives dedicated to the monumental task of running a kingdom. They were the architects of Ma'at, the cosmic order, translating my divine will into the practical realities of tax collection, justice, and monumental construction. Now their primary occupation seems to be the meticulous documentation of our own glorious decline, alongside a healthy dose of backstabbing. The dysfunction begins at the very top, with my council of advisors. This collection of high-ranking officials, once the wisest and most powerful men in the two lands, has devolved into a squabbling cabal of paranoid old fools. Their days are not spent devising strategies to combat the famine or quell the rebellions. No, their energies are consumed by palace intrigue, by forging petty alliances and spreading malicious rumors about their rivals. The fate of the kingdom is a distant second to the pressing question of who holds the most influence over a pharaoh who has no influence left to wield. My advisors now spend more time bickering over who gets the last moldy fig than actually advising. The good news, my desk is no longer overflowing with petitions. The bad news, it's because no one cares. The endless stream of papyrus scrolls that once flowed into the capital from every corner of the kingdom has dried up. The Nomarchs no longer bother to send reports, the priests no longer seek my guidance, and the people no longer believe I can solve their problem. My administrative role has been reduced to presiding over the orderly dissolution of my own authority. Corruption, once a whispered accusation dealt with swiftly and harshly, is now the unofficial currency of the court. With the royal treasury all but empty, officials have resorted to lining their own pockets through any means necessary. Justice is sold to the highest bidder, government positions are awarded to the most sycophantic crony, and what little resources remain in the state's coffers are siphoned off to fund the lavish lifestyles of men who produce nothing but paperwork. They are meticulously arranging the deck chairs on a sinking barge. Paranoia hangs thick in the air of the palace, a cloying perfume of fear and suspicion. Every conversation is held in hushed tones. Every glance is scrutinized for hidden meaning. I see my advisors watching me, their minds working feverishly to determine if my favor is shifting, if their position is secure. They watch each other with even greater intensity, convinced that their rivals are plotting their downfall. The trust that once bound the court together has been replaced by a pervasive, soul-crushing anxiety. I am not immune to this paranoia. I trust no one. How can I? The vizier, my most senior official, smiles to my face, while his family secretly corresponds with a rebellious nomarch in the Delta. The royal treasurer assures me that the state's finances are stable, while I know for a fact that he is building a new, heavily fortified villa for himself. Even my own royal guards look at me with an unnerving mixture of pity and calculation. They are loyal, for now. But loyalty is a luxury that few can afford in these desperate times. My isolation is a palpable thing, a wall of silence and suspicion that separates me from the realities of my own kingdom. My advisors feed me a carefully curated diet of misinformation, painting a rosy picture of stability and control that bears no resemblance to the chaos raging outside the palace walls. They tell me the people are still loyal, that the nomarchs are merely exercising a healthy degree of regional autonomy. They think I am a fool, a puppet to be manipulated. Perhaps they are right. The sheer administrative nightmare of managing this dying empire is enough to drive a man to madness. We are a government of ghosts, issuing decrees that are never read, sending orders that are never followed. I signed documents allocating grain that does not exist to feed armies that have long since deserted. We meticulously update our tax rolls, even as the taxpayers themselves are either dead or have pledged their allegiance to a local warlord. It is a theater of the absurd, and I am its unwilling lead actor. The scribal schools, once the pride of our civilization, now produce graduates who are masters of bureaucratic obfuscation. They have perfected the art of writing reports that say nothing, of drafting laws that are unenforceable, of creating complex charts that illustrate our descent into chaos with beautiful, precise hieroglyphs. They are the cartographers of our own shipwreck, meticulously mapping the shoals upon which we have already run aground. The Royal Archives, a repository of our collective knowledge and history, have become a source of bitter irony. I can read the accounts of my great ancestors, of the mighty pharaohs who commanded armies, built pyramids, and held the world in the palm of their hands. I can study the detailed records of a functioning government, a prosperous economy, a unified and worshipful people. It is like reading a fairy tale, a fantasy of a world that no longer exists. The day-to-day business of the court has been reduced to a series of empty rituals. We still perform the daily ceremonies, the offerings to the gods, the formal audiences with foreign dignitaries, what few of them still bother to visit, but the meaning has been stripped from these actions. They are hollow gestures, a desperate attempt to maintain a facade of normalcy while the world crumbles around us. We are all just going through the motions, waiting for the inevitable end. The once lavish feasts in the royal hall are now sad, pathetic affairs. The variety and abundance of the past have been replaced by a monotonous diet of whatever scraps the royal purveyors can scrounge up. The conversation is stilted and strained, the laughter is forced. We eat our meager rations under the watchful eyes of the gods painted on the walls, their serene, all-knowing faces a silent rebuke to our present misery. The harem, once a source of pleasure and a symbol of the pharaoh's virility, has become another hotbed of intrigue and despair. The royal wives and concubines, with little else to occupy their time, engage in their own petty power struggles. their whispers and plots echoing the larger conflicts of the court. They, too, are prisoners of this gilded cage, their futures as uncertain as my own. My attempts to assert my authority are met with a frustrating combination of passive resistance and outright defiance. I issue a decree demanding that the Nomarchs send their tax revenues to the capital, and it is simply ignored. I order the arrest of a corrupt official, and he is spirited away by his powerful friends before my guards can reach him. My will, which was once the engine of the entire kingdom, is now a voice crying in the wilderness. The administrative machinery is not just broken, it is actively working against itself. The Ministry of Agriculture is drawing up ambitious plans for new irrigation projects, while the Ministry of the Treasury reports that we cannot even afford to repair the existing canals. The Ministry of War is planning a glorious campaign to reunite the two lands, while the generals privately admit that they can barely feed the troops they have left. It is a government at war with its own reality. The sheer volume of useless paperwork is staggering. Every department, every official, every scribe seems determined to justify their own existence by producing mountains of papyrus. We have reports on the declining bird population in the marshlands, detailed analyses of the grammatical errors in a rival nomarch's latest edict, and lengthy proposals for reforming the system of royal wig maintenance. We are drowning in a sea of irrelevant ink. The few honest and competent officials who remain are fighting a losing battle. They work tirelessly trying to hold the system together, to maintain some semblance of order and integrity, but they are islands of sanity in an ocean of incompetence and corruption. I see the despair in their eyes, the weariness in their posture. They know, as I do, that their efforts are ultimately futile. The flight of talent from the capital has been a slow but steady drain on our administrative capacity. The best and brightest scribes, architects, and engineers have seen the writing on the wall. They have either retired to their country estates or offered their services to the rising Nomarchs, who can provide them with the resources and security that I no longer can. The court is being bled dry of the very expertise it needs to survive. The succession is a topic that no one dares to speak of openly, but it is on everyone's mind. I have a son, an heir to this shadow of a kingdom, but what am I leaving him? A bankrupt treasury? A fractured realm? A legacy of failure? His inheritance is not a throne, but a death sentence. The courtiers are already beginning to choose sides, to align themselves with the faction they believe will come out on top in the inevitable power struggle that will follow my death. My days are spent in a state of suspended animation. I wake, I eat, I preside over meaningless meetings, I sign useless documents, I go to sleep. The world outside the palace walls has become an abstraction, a series of grim reports that I am powerless to change. I am a prisoner of my own divine status, trapped in a golden cage, while my kingdom burns. The gods, in their infinite wisdom, have truly abandoned us. Or perhaps this is their lesson. Perhaps they are teaching us that a kingdom cannot be sustained by bureaucracy alone, that a pharaoh cannot rule through ritual and decree. Perhaps they are showing us that when the foundations of justice and prosperity crumble, the entire edifice of the state, no matter how grand, will inevitably collapse. This court is no longer the center of the world. It is the eye of the storm, a deceptively calm space, surrounded by a maelstrom of chaos and destruction. But the storm is closing in, and soon there will be nowhere left to hide. The vipers in this pit will eventually turn on each other, and then on me. It is only a matter of time. If you're still sane after that, click that subscribe button before the next administrative breakdown. Your subscription is a vote for coherent thought in an age of bureaucratic madness. It sends a message, however small, that someone out there still values order over chaos. Do it now, before the royal scribe for subscription monitoring declares a budget crisis and absconds with the ink. There was a time when the word of the pharaoh was as immutable as the northern star, a command that brought order to the cosmos and obedience from every soul in the two lands. That time feels like a half-remembered dream, a fable told to children. The divine aura that once protected my officials and enforced my laws has evaporated under the heat of a merciless sun. and the gnawing agony of starvation. The quiet, desperate suffering has finally boiled over into a furious, roaring flame of rebellion, and my kingdom is the kindling. It began not as a coordinated uprising, but as sporadic flashes of violence, like sparks from a flit. A tax collector, arriving in a village to demand tribute that did not exist, would be found floating face down in a dry irrigation ditch the next morning. A granary official, known for his cruelty and his well-fed belly, would be dragged from his home and beaten to death by a mob of skeletal farmers. These were not acts of political defiance, not yet. They were raw, primal screams of anguish from a people pushed beyond the brink of endurance. But these isolated acts of desperation soon coalesced into something far more dangerous. The farmers, who for centuries had toiled obediently in the fields, began to organize. They had nothing left to lose. Their lands were barren, their families were starving, and their gods were silent. The fear of pharaonic retribution, once a potent deterrent, now seemed a distant and abstract threat compared to the immediate certainty of starvation. The choice between dying on their knees and dying on their feet was, for many, no choice at all. These are not disciplined armies marching under a single banner. This is chaos given human form. They are mobs armed with little more than farming implements and a burning rage. Hoes and sickles, once tools of life-giving cultivation, have become instruments of death. They swarm over the countryside, a locust plague of angry men, stripping the land of whatever little remains and tearing down the symbols of the old order that so spectacularly failed them. The targets of their fury are predictable. They fall upon the sprawling estates of the wealthy, the very people who managed to stay fat while the rest of the country wasted away. They burn the luxurious villas, slaughter the prized livestock, and shatter the fine pottery. They are not just seeking food, they are seeking vengeance. They are tearing down the edifice of a society that they believe was built on their backs and then left them to die in the dust. The local officials, my representatives, are being hunted like animals. Scribes, mayors, and priests, once respected figures of authority, are now symbols of the oppression that has led to this misery. They are dragged from their offices, their records and deeds burned in great bonfires that light up the night sky. The administrative centers of the gnomes, once orderly hubs of bureaucracy, have become battlegrounds, their floors slick with the blood of my administrators. The lawlessness is absolute. The concept of private property has been utterly erased. A man's possessions are now determined by the strength of his arm and the number of his allies. Banditry is no longer a clandestine activity conducted in the shadows. It is the new economy. Gangs of armed men roam the highways, preying on anyone foolish enough to travel, while others have taken over entire villages, ruling them as petty, brutal kings. And what of my response to this tide of anarchy? What of the legendary might of the Pharaoh's army, my divine armies? Mostly busy trying to find bread or joining the rebels. Hard to blame them, frankly. A spear doesn't fill a belly. A soldier is a man like any other, with a family to feed and a stomach that growls with the same emptiness. When faced with the choice between defending a distant, powerless pharaoh and joining a rebellion that offers the promise of a full meal, their loyalty becomes a very flexible thing. The reports from my generals, those who have remained loyal, are a litany of despair. Their troops are demoralized, underfed, and outnumbered. They are not fighting a foreign enemy with a clear battle line, but their own countrymen in a chaotic, swirling melee. How do you command a soldier to cut down a man who looks just like his own starving brother? How do you maintain discipline when the rebels are shouting promises of food and land? Many of the garrisons I stationed throughout the provinces have simply melted away. Some soldiers have deserted, slipping away in the night to try and find their families. Others have gone over to the enemy, their skills and weapons now turned against me. Entire legions have pledged their allegiance to the local Nomarchs, the provincial warlords who can at least guarantee them a steady ration. My military, once the guarantor of my power, has fractured and turned upon itself. The attempts I have made to deploy troops from the capital have been disastrous. A relief column sent to quell a riot in the Delta was ambushed and annihilated before it even reached its destination. The rebels, fighting on their own territory, know the land far better than my soldiers. They use the terrain to their advantage, staging hit-and-run attacks, melting back into the populace, and turning the countryside into a death trap. The very idea of a pitched battle has become almost quaint. There are no grand confrontations on open plains. This is a war fought in the narrow alleyways of towns, in the dusty fields between villages, and in the dark recesses of the human heart. It is a war of attrition, and it is a war I am losing. For every rebel I manage to kill, 10 more rise up, their hearts hardened by grief and their minds consumed by a desire for revenge. The social order has not just broken down, it has been inverted. The Lamentations of Ipuwer, a rather bleak piece of poetry that has become popular in the court, captures this perfectly. Behold, the poor of the land have become rich, and the owner of property is one who has nothing, he writes. The servant girls now wear the fine linen of their mistresses, and the children of princes are dashed against the walls. It is a world turned upside down, a carnival of chaos where the old rules no longer apply. This inversion is not just about wealth, it is about status and power. The once revered priests are mocked in the streets, their sacred texts used as kindling. The learned scribes are forced to work the mill, their delicate hands raw and bleeding. The nobles, who once prided themselves on their refined manners and their distance from the common rabble, are now beggars, indistinguishable from the very people they once despised. The rebellion has even breached the sanctity of the necropolis. The great tombs of my ancestors, designed to be eternal homes for the mighty dead, have been systematically plundered. The rebels, driven by a combination of greed and a desire to desecrate the symbols of the old regime, have broken through the stone barriers and looted the sacred burial chambers. The treasures meant to fund the afterlife of the kings are now being used to fund the insurrection of the common. The desecration of the tombs is perhaps the most profound symbol of our fall. It is an attack not just on the dead, but on the very foundations of our belief system. If the eternal rest of a pharaoh is not sacred, what is? It is a declaration that the rebels no longer fear the wrath of the gods, that they have lost all faith in the cosmic order that my ancestors so carefully constructed. The violence has taken on a life of its own. What may have started as a desperate hunger riot has now morphed into a full-blown civil war, fueled by ancient resentments and new ambitions. Old village rivalries have flared into open warfare. Gnomes that have long harbored grudges against their neighbors now see an opportunity to settle old scores. The land is not just at war with me, it is at war with itself. The brutality is breathtaking. Prisoners are not taken. The wounded are not spared. The violence is personal, intimate, and fueled by a rage that has been simmering for years. This is not the clean, honorable warfare of kings and armies. This is the messy, savage butchery of a people who have lost their humanity in the struggle for survival. And in the capital, we are helpless spectators to our own demise. We receive fragmented reports of atrocities, of towns put to the torch, of officials flayed alive. We draw maps and try to track the movements of the rebel bands, but it is a futile exercise. They are everywhere and nowhere, a phantom army that rises from the earth itself. My court remains a bubble of detached denial. Some of my advisors still speak of a decisive military victory, of crushing the rebellion and restoring order. They are fools. They do not understand the nature of the beast we are facing. This is not a rebellion that can be defeated with spears and shields. It is a rebellion of the spirit, a rejection of the very idea of pharaonic authority. I am a pharaoh who cannot protect his own officials, a king who cannot enforce his own laws, a living God who cannot even feed his own people. The titles I hold are empty, the crowns I wear are hollow. I am the ruler of a kingdom that exists only on papyrus, a sovereign of a realm of chaos and despair. The silence from the gods is the rebels' greatest recruiting tool. Every day that the sun rises on a barren field is another proof that the old ways have failed. Every child that cries from hunger is another convert to the cause of rebellion. The gods' indifference has become a justification for the people's rage. They believe they have been abandoned, and so they feel free to abandon the laws that were once handed down from on high. The future of this land is being written in blood and fire. Perhaps a new order will rise from these ashes, forged in the crucible of this terrible violence. Perhaps one of the warlords or rebel leaders will prove strong enough to unite the two lands once more. But it will be a kingdom built on a foundation of bones, a dynasty born from the murder of its predecessor. For now, there is only the roar of the mob and the crackle of the flames. The gentle music of the court has been replaced by the discordant symphony of rebellion. The age of order is dead. The age of rage has begun. This is the legacy of the gods' silence, the final, bloody chapter in the story of my kingdom's fall. Don't let our rebellion fade. Subscribe for more chaotic history. Every subscription is a small blow against the crumbling edifice of the old order. Join the ranks of the enlightened who watch history unfold from a safe distance. Click that button and prove that while my armies may be deserting, my audience is growing. It's the only victory I'm likely to get. Of all the pillars that upheld our world, the most fundamental, the very bedrock upon which our civilization was built, was our covenant with the gods. The famine is a wound in our belly, the rebellion a festering sore on our body politic, but the silence of the gods is a sickness of the soul. It is an existential dread that seeps into the very marrow of our bones, leaving behind a cold, hollow emptiness. Every aspect of our existence was predicated on a simple, elegant transaction. We served the gods, and in return they maintained the cosmic order, Ma'ot. It appears they have reviewed the terms of our contract and found us wanting. I am the son of Ra, the living Horus, the intermediary between the celestial and the terrestrial. My very being is the conduit through which divine grace flows into the world of men. It is my sacred duty to speak to the gods on behalf of my people, to perform the rituals that ensure the sun will rise, the Nile will flood, and the land will be fertile. For generations, this has been the unquestioned reality. The Pharaoh performed his duties, and the universe in turn performed its own. But the universe has, it seems, gone on strike. The early days of the drought were filled with a frantic, almost manic piety. The temples, which had grown fat and complacent on centuries of abundance, were suddenly bustling with activity. The priests, their faces etched with a newfound gravity, led endless processions. The altars groaned under the weight of offerings. Oxen, fowl, beer, bread, all the things we could ill afford to spare, sacrificed in a desperate attempt to catch the attention of our divine patron. We were like children, convinced that a grander gesture, a louder prayer, would surely earn back a neglectful parent's affection. We prayed, we sacrificed, we built giant stone effigies, and the sky just sat there, very unhelpful. Maybe they changed their address. We chanted the ancient hymns until our throats were raw. We recited the liturgies that had served my ancestors for 1,000 years. I, your Pharaoh, spent sleepless nights in the Holy of Holies of the great temples, prostrating myself before the cold stone visages of the gods, begging them, demanding of them some sign, some omen, some indication that they were still listening. All I received in return was the echo of my own desperate voice. Where is Ra, the sun god, our father and creator? Each morning his solar barge dutifully appears on the eastern horizon, but its light no longer feels like a benevolent blessing. It is a harsh, scorching glare that bakes our fields into cracked pottery and withers the last vestiges of life. He still sails across the sky, a distant, impassive spectator to our suffering. Has he grown so old and weary that he no longer sees the plight of his children? Or has he simply turned his face away in disgust? And Osiris, the lord of the underworld, the promise of eternal life and resurrection? His story is the very model of our agricultural cycle, death and rebirth, the dormancy of the seed and the sprouting of the grain. But with the failure of the Nile, the story has stopped mid-sentence. There is only death, no rebirth. The fields are as barren as his desert kingdom. Has he too been vanquished by his brother Set, this time for good, as the principle of chaos finally and irrevocably triumphed over the principle of order? The people, in their misery, have begun to ask the unthinkable. At first the questions were whispered, fearful heresies uttered in the privacy of their homes. Now they are shouted in the streets. If the Pharaoh is truly the beloved of the gods, why have the gods abandoned us? If his rituals are truly potent, Why do our children starve? The very foundation of my legitimacy, my divine connection, has become my greatest liability. I am the living proof of the gods' indifference. This theological crisis has shattered our once unified faith into 1,000 desperate fragments. The old, stately religion of the state temples has lost its hold on the popular imagination. People are turning elsewhere for solace, for answers, for any glimmer of hope in the overwhelming darkness. New, wilder cults are springing up in the villages, led by charismatic prophets who claim to have a direct line to some previously unknown and hopefully more attentive deity. Some have turned to the worship of darker, more primal forces, believing that if the gods of order have failed, perhaps the gods of chaos will be more responsive. The worship of Set, once confined to the margins of our society, is gaining a terrifying new popularity. People make desperate bloody offerings to the god of storms and violence, hoping to appease the very forces that are tearing our world apart. It is a spiritual surrender, an admission that if you cannot beat chaos, you may as well join it. Others have retreated into a kind of personal piety, abandoning the grand impersonal gods of the state in favor of more intimate, local deities. They focus on the worship of household gods, of ancestral spirits, of the minor gods of a specific village or trade. It is a shrinking of the spiritual world, a retreat from the failed cosmic order into the smaller, more manageable realm of the immediate and the personal. If the king of the gods will not listen, perhaps the god of your own hearth will. The priests, who were once the unshakable pillars of our faith, are now as lost as the rest of us. Many have been killed by angry mobs, their temples looted and burned. Those who remain are divided. Some cling to the old dogmas with a blind, desperate faith, insisting that this is merely a test, that if we just pray harder, sacrifice more, the gods will eventually relent. They are fools, preaching to an empty temple. Others have become cynics and opportunists, using their religious authority to exploit the fears of the desperate. They sell fake relics and worthless amulets, promising magical protection against hunger and disease. They have turned their temples into dens of thieves, their sacred calling into a sordid commercial enterprise. They are profiting from the very crisis of faith that they are supposed to be solving. And then there are the few who have had the courage to confront the terrifying truth. I have spoken to some of them, old, wise priests whose faith has been burned away by the harsh realities we face. They confess, in hushed and trembling voices, that they no longer know what to believe. The old certainties are gone. The old answers no longer suffice. They look at the silent, impassive faces of the statues they have served their entire lives, and they see nothing but carved stone. This is the ultimate horror, the suspicion that there is nothing behind the curtain, that the gods are not angry or absent or testing us, that they are simply not there at all, that our entire civilization, our pyramids, our temples, our art, our morality, has been built on a foundation of wishful thinking, a collective delusion we created to shield ourselves from the terrifying silence of an empty universe. I, the son of Ra, am haunted by this thought more than any other. My entire life, my every action has been predicated on my divine role. I have spoken to the gods, I have felt their presence, I have believed with every fiber of my being in my sacred mission. But now there is only silence, a vast, cosmic emptiness that mocks my titles and my crowns. Am I a god-king, or am I the high priest of a dead religion? The rituals feel like a hollow mockery. I go through the motions, I recite the ancient words, but the magic is gone. It is like speaking a language that no one else understands, a conversation with a ghost. I feel like an actor in a play that has been running for too long, its audience long since departed, its meaning lost to time. I am the pharaoh of a kingdom of ghosts, praying to a pantheon of echoes. This existential dread is a far more potent poison than any rebel's spear. It saps the will to fight, the will to rebuild, the will to even survive. If our lives are not part of a divine plan, if our suffering has no cosmic purpose, then what is the point of it all? Why should we endure this endless misery if it is all just a meaningless accident, a random fluctuation in a universe that does not care whether we live or die? The breakdown of the moral order is a direct consequence of this spiritual collapse. If the gods are not watching, if there is no judgment in the afterlife, no weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at, then why should a man be just? Why should he be merciful? Why should he not take what he can, through any means necessary? The lawlessness in the streets is a reflection of the lawlessness in the heavens. The very concept of the afterlife, our greatest comfort and our most profound cultural achievement, is now in doubt. We have spent centuries building elaborate tombs and perfecting the art of mummification, all to ensure a glorious eternity in the field of reeds. But if Osiris has been vanquished, if the underworld itself is in chaos, what are we preparing for? Are our sacred tombs nothing more than elaborate, pointless graves? The coffin texts that are becoming popular among the wealthy nobles reflect this new uncertainty. They are filled with desperate spells, magical roadmaps designed to help the deceased navigate a perilous and uncertain afterlife. They are no longer confident of a warm welcome from Osiris. They are preparing for a desperate struggle for survival in a hostile underworld. Our pessimism has now extended beyond the grave. We, the people of the Nile, once the most confident and optimistic of all civilizations, have become a nation of fatalists. We are consumed by a sense of impending doom, a belief that we are living in the end times. The old stories of the destruction of mankind by a wrathful Ra no longer seem like distant myths. They feel like prophecies that are unfolding before our very eye. Perhaps this is our punishment. Perhaps we grew too proud, too complacent. We believed that our pyramids could touch the heavens, that our power was absolute, that our covenant with the gods was unbreakable. We mistook their temporary favor for an eternal guarantee. We became so enamored with our own greatness that we forgot the fragility of the foundations upon which it was built. I stand here in the ruins of my kingdom and I have no answers. I, who was supposed to be the source of all wisdom, am as lost and bewildered as the lowliest beggar in my starving cities. I have no divine guidance to offer, no comforting words of reassurance. I have only the same terrifying questions that haunt all of you. The silence is the only truth I have left, a profound, unyielding silence that has swallowed our prayers, our hopes, and our entire civilization. We are on our own. For the first time in our long and storied history, the people of the Nile must face the darkness without the guiding light of our gods. May whatever is left of our own human spirit be enough. If you're still listening and haven't lost your faith, or sanity, subscribe to our channel. Your subscription is a small act of defiance against the crushing silence, a vote of confidence in the power of the human voice to find meaning in the darkness. Click the button and let us face the existential void together. It's better than facing it alone. Of all the duties of a pharaoh, none is more sacred, more fundamental to our very identity than the act of building. We build to honor the gods, to house our eternal spirits, to declare our power to the world and to the ages. My ancestors raised mountains of stone from the desert floor, their pyramids a testament to a kingdom so wealthy, so powerful, it could command a literal army of laborers and a river of resources. I, on the other hand, am faced with a far more delicate budgetary problem. The people clamor for porridge, while tradition, and my own immortal soul, demands a pyramid. It is a most awkward predicament. The royal treasury, once a bottomless wellspring of gold, grain, and precious stones, now echoes with the lonely sound of a few stray copper deben clinking together. The tribute from the provinces has ceased. The taxes from the farmers are non-existent, for they have nothing left to tax. The mines and quarries, once bustling with my workers, are now either abandoned or under the control of some upstart nomarch who fancies himself a king. The entire economic engine of our civilization has seized up, and yet the bills for eternity keep coming. It's hard to justify another grand tomb when your people are eating mud bricks. But what's a pharaoh without a really, really big hole in the ground? It is the ultimate expression of our divine right, the cornerstone of our entire belief system. To cease construction on my funerary complex would be to admit defeat, to concede that my reign is so insignificant, my spirit so unworthy, that I do not merit a proper house for eternity. It would be a theological and political surrender of the highest order. And besides, the plans are already drawn, the location is perfect. So, against all reason, against the silent, accusing stares of my starving subjects, the work continues, or rather, it sputters along, a pale shadow of the grand projects of the past. The once mighty workforce, tens of thousands strong, has dwindled to a few hundred half-starved, sullen men. They are not the proud, well-fed laborers who built the great pyramids of Giza. They are gaunt figures, their ribs starkly visible, their movements slow and listless. Their loyalty is not bought with promises of glory in the next life, but with a daily ration of grain so meager it barely keeps them on their feet. The quality of the materials has also seen a rather steep decline. The massive, perfectly cut limestone blocks of our ancestors have been replaced with smaller, cruder stones, often pilfered from older, less significant monuments. The fine, imported cedarwood for the burial chamber has been substituted with local acacia, which is prone to warping. The once brilliant gold leaf that would have adorned the walls is now applied so thinly it is practically transparent. We are building my eternal home on a budget, a concept I am sure my great-grandfather Sneferu would have found utterly baffling. The financial strain of even this pathetic project is immense. Every block of stone, every measure of grain for the workers, every copper chisel that needs replacing is a drain on our dwindling resources. My treasurer, a man whose face is now permanently etched with a look of profound despair, presents me daily with scrolls of accounts that are more works of creative fiction than accurate ledgers. He speaks of projected revenues and creative resource allocation, which I have come to understand as euphemisms for we have no money and we are stealing from someone else. This has led to a moral crisis that permeates every level of the elite. While the common people perish in the streets, the nobles and high officials who remain in the capital still cling to a semblance of their former luxury. They host small, sad dinner parties where they complain about the declining quality of the wine. They commission new jewelry, though there is no one left to impress. They argue over the dwindling number of comfortable positions in a bureaucracy that no longer functions. Their opulence, however faded, is a constant galling insult to the widespread destitution that surrounds them. The contrast is not lost on the populace. The sight of a stone block being dragged to my pyramid site while their children cry from hunger is a powerful symbol of our misplaced priorities. The whispers in the marketplace are not just of hunger, but of injustice. They see a pharaoh and an elite class more concerned with their own eternal comfort than with the temporal suffering of the people they are supposed to protect. Every stone laid in my tomb is another brick in the wall of their resentment. This dilemma has forced us to make some rather unorthodox financial decisions. The funerary endowments of my long-dead ancestors, once considered sacrosanct, have been re-evaluated. The vast estates and agricultural lands that were set aside to provide eternal offerings for their spirits have been quietly reappropriated by the state. I am in effect robbing my great-great-grandfather to pay for my own tomb. I can only hope his spirit is understanding. After all, what is a dynasty if not a family that shares? The temples of the lesser gods have also been asked to make contributions. Their granaries, which are often better stocked than my own, have been subjected to a divine wealth tax. The priests protest, of course, wailing about sacrilege and the wrath of the gods. But I have found that a small contingent of well-armed and, more importantly, well-fed soldiers is a very effective theological argument. It appears the gods are more willing to part with their earthly possessions than their priests would have you believe. Even the tombs of my more obscure relatives have not been spared. A recent inventory of several older, minor pyramids in the Memphite necropolis revealed a surprising amount of surplus building materials and redundant funerary goods. It is amazing what one can find when one is motivated. We are recycling our way to eternity, a concept that is as sustainable as it is deeply, profoundly heretical. The moral gymnastics required to justify these actions are exhausting. I must simultaneously project an image of unshakable divine authority while also engaging in acts of petty larceny and grave robbing. I must speak of the sanctity of the cosmic order while my agents are prying the gold leaf from the coffin of some forgotten queen. It is a delicate balancing act, performed on the high wire of our own hypocrisy. The workers on my tomb site are a constant source of anxiety. They are not just laborers, they are a captive audience to my folly. They see the crude construction, they handle the shoddy materials, they feel the emptiness of their own stomachs. They know that this is not the work of a mighty, all-powerful God-king. It is the desperate vanity project of a failed ruler. How long before their sullen obedience curdles into open rebellion? The financial crisis has also led to a brain drain of epic proportions. The skilled artisans, the master craftsmen, who possessed the secrets of our greatest artistic achievements have fled the capital. They have offered their services to the provincial Nomarchs, who can pay them in actual gold, not in promises of a blessed afterlife. My tomb is being built by the apprentices and the second-rate craftsmen who were not good enough to leave. It will be a monument to mediocrity, an eternal testament to our decline. The project is a magnet for corruption. The overseers, knowing that the central administration is weak and distracted, are skimming resources at an alarming rate. The grain intended for the workers is sold on the black market. The copper tools are lost and then reappear in some provincial marketplace. The entire enterprise is riddled with graft, a microcosm of the larger decay that has consumed the kingdom. My advisors are split on the issue. One faction, the traditionalists, urges me to continue the project at all costs. They argue that to stop would be a sign of weakness, an admission that the age of the great builders is over. They speak of the importance of tradition, of upholding the dignity of the pharaonic office. They are, of course, the ones who have already secured their own plots in my funerary complex. Another faction, the pragmatists, begs me to abandon the project and redirect the resources to famine relief. They argue that a pharaoh's first duty is to his people, that a tomb is worthless if there is no one left to remember who is buried in it. They present me with grim statistics on mortality rates and grain shortages. They are, of course, the ones whose own families are beginning to feel the pinch of hunger. And so I am trapped, caught between the demands of my immortal soul and the desperate cries of my dying people. To continue the project is to invite the hatred of my subjects. To abandon it is to betray my ancestors and my own divine destiny. Either way, my legacy is likely to be one of failure. It is simply a question of whether I will be remembered as a heartless tyrant or a feeble incompetent. The sheer absurdity of the situation is not lost on me. We are a civilization that perfected the art of preserving the human body for millions of years, but we cannot figure out how to keep it alive for one more season. We can move mountains of granite, but we cannot move a single bushel of wheat from a hoarder's granary to a starving child's mouth. Our technical achievements are monumental, our moral and political failures even more so. The tomb itself has become a symbol of this disconnect. It rises slowly, painfully from the desert floor, a monument not to my power but to my impotence. It is a testament to a king so obsessed with his own death that he neglected the lives of his people. It is the most expensive, most elaborate, most pointless hole in the ground that has ever been conceived. The elite of our society are complicit in this folly. They continue to pour their own dwindling wealth into their own elaborate tombs, creating a miniature city of the dead that stands in stark contrast to the dying cities of the living. The necropolis is the only part of our kingdom that is still showing signs of economic growth. It is a boom town for the deceased. We have become a death cult, a civilization so fixated on the next world that we have completely abandoned our responsibilities in this one. We have allowed our fear of mortality to overshadow our duty to humanity. We are building a paradise for our corpses, while creating a hell for our children. Ultimately, the choice is not between a pyramid and porridge. It is between hope and despair. To continue building is to cling to the hope that the old order can be restored, that the gods will once again smile upon us, that my eternal spirit will one day join them in the heavens. To stop is to surrender to the despair that threatens to consume us all. And so, the work continues. The hammers ring out in the desolate landscape, a feeble, defiant rhythm against the deafening silence of the gods. I do not know if it is an act of faith or an act of madness, but it is the only act I have left. I am a pharaoh, and a pharaoh must build. even if it is only his own grave. Support our dwindling royal coffers. Smash that subscribe button. Every subscription is a virtual block of stone for my pyramid, a symbolic contribution to a project that is as grand as it is ill-advised. Help me build a legacy that will baffle archaeologists for centuries to come. Click now, before the Treasury is forced to declare spiritual bankruptcy. There is a subtle yet deeply unsettling indicator of our decline that goes beyond the empty granaries and the rebellious provinces. It is a decay that can be seen in the very stone and papyrus that defines us. Our culture, once a radiant beacon of artistic and intellectual achievement, is dimming. The confident, masterful strokes of our ancestors have been replaced by the hesitant, clumsy hands of a generation that has forgotten how to create beauty. We are not just starving for bread, we are starving for inspiration. The monumental works that once defined our age have ground to a halt. No new pyramids pierce the horizon, no grand temples rise to honor the silent gods. The quarries are quiet, the causeways are empty. The national focus has shifted from the eternal to the immediate. When your primary concern is finding your next meal, you have little time or energy to devote to carving a perfect bas relief for a tomb that will likely be looted before your mummy has even had a chance to settle in. This cultural decay is most evident in the quality of the craftsmanship. The statues of my ancestors were masterpieces of serene power, their limestone and granite forms imbued with a timeless, divine grace. The statues being carved today, well, they have a certain rustic charm if one is being generous. The proportions are often wrong, the features are crude, and the serene confidence has been replaced by a look of mild surprise, as if the statue itself is shocked to have been created at all. The hieroglyphs these days are less majestic decree and more help out of bread. It lacks a certain permanence. The elegant, perfectly formed symbols carved by the master scribes of the Old Kingdom have devolved into a kind of shorthand. The lines are rushed, the details are omitted. Reading a modern inscription is a chore, a deciphering of a crude and impoverished version of our sacred script. It is as if the language itself is suffering from malnutrition. This decline is a direct result of the brain drain that has crippled the capital. The master craftsmen, the artists who held the accumulated knowledge of generations in their hands and minds, have fled. They have taken their skills to the courts of the provincial Nomarchs, who can offer them security and, more importantly, a steady supply of food. I am left with the apprentices, the students, and the artistically challenged. The A-team has left the building. I am attempting to build a civilization with the reserves. The scribal schools, once the engine of our sophisticated bureaucracy and the guardians of our literary tradition, are in a state of collapse. The curriculum has been simplified. The focus is no longer on the elegant composition of religious texts or the nuances of legal theory. The primary skill being taught is how to write a convincing request for emergency grain supplies. We are training a generation of bureaucrats whose sole purpose is to manage our decline with a modicum of literacy. The literary output of our age is, frankly, depressing. Gone are the confident, optimistic texts celebrating the achievements of the pharaoh and the glory of the gods. The new genre of choice is the lamentation. We are awash in poems and treatises describing in excruciating detail how dreadful everything has become. Our scribes have become masters of misery, their papyrus scrolls filled with tales of woe, injustice, and the general unpleasantness of living in a failed state. The great workshops that once produced the fine linen, the exquisite jewelry, and the masterful furniture for the royal court and the temples are now mostly shuttered. We can no longer source the raw materials, the gold from Nubia, the cedar from Lebanon, the lapis lazuli from the Far East. Our trade routes have been severed by bandits and warlords. The elite must now make do with local substitutes, a state of affairs that has caused more genuine anguish among the nobility than the starvation of 1 million peasants. The architectural innovation that defined the Old Kingdom is a distant memory. We are no longer experimenting with new building techniques or pushing the boundaries of engineering. We are simply trying to remember how our ancestors did it. The few construction projects that are still underway are plagued by errors, collapses, and a general lack of ambition. We are not building for eternity anymore, We are just trying to get a roof over our heads before it rains, assuming it ever rains again. The provincial art that is emerging in the courts of the Nomarchs is a strange and unsettling phenomenon. It is a crude imitation of the old royal style, but with a distinct local flavor. The figures are often distorted, the poses are stiff, and the themes are almost exclusively focused on the power and glory of the local warlord. It is the art of a fractured kingdom, a visual representation of our disunity. Each nomarch is now his own pharaoh, with his own court artists churning out propaganda to legitimize his rule. This decentralization of culture is perhaps the most insidious aspect of our decay. For centuries, the royal court at Memphis set the standard for all art, all literature, all fashion. We were a unified culture, bound together by a shared aesthetic and a common set of beliefs. Now we are a patchwork of competing cultural spheres, each one a pale and distorted echo of the glorious original. We have lost our cultural coherence. The loss of skilled administrators is as devastating as the loss of skilled artists. The complex machinery of the state required a vast army of literate, numerate, and highly trained officials. These men, the products of our elite scribal schools, were the unsung heroes of the Old Kingdom. They managed the national granaries, oversaw the irrigation systems, and administered the legal code with remarkable efficiency. Most of them are now either dead, retired, or working for the highest bidder in the provinces. The institutional memory of the state is fading. The archives are in disarray, the records are incomplete. We are losing the knowledge of how to run a large, centralized kingdom because we no longer have one. The administrative expertise that was built up over centuries is evaporating, and with it, our ability to ever effectively govern this land again, should the opportunity arise. The impact of this cultural and intellectual decay is profound. It creates a sense of disorientation, of living in a world that is no longer recognizable. The familiar symbols of our power and stability are either gone or have been debased. The temples are shabby, the statues are ugly, the writing is crude. It is a constant visual reminder of our fallen state. It also fosters a deep sense of pessimism about the future. When a civilization loses its ability to create beauty and knowledge, it loses its sense of purpose, its belief in its own capacity for greatness. We are no longer a people who look to the horizon with confidence. We are a people who look at the dust at our feet, mourning a past that we can never reclaim, and dreading a future that we cannot imagine. The very concept of high culture has become a mockery. In a society where the primary struggle is for physical survival, the pursuit of art and learning seems like a frivolous, almost obscene luxury. A man who can recite poetry but cannot find a root to eat is a fool. A man who can design a temple but cannot build a shelter for his family is a failure. The pragmatic skills of the farmer and the soldier have replaced the refined talents of the scribe and the artist as the most valued in our society. This has led to a coarsening of the national character. The subtleties of our ancient culture, the complex theology, the sophisticated literature, the elegant etiquette, are being replaced by a more brutal, more simplistic, more direct way of life. We are becoming a nation of survivors, not a nation of builders or thinkers. The finer points of civilization are being ground away by the relentless millstone of our suffering. The moral dimension of our culture has also been eroded. The texts of our ancestors were filled with wisdom, with exhortations to live a just and righteous life in accordance with Ma'at. The stories we tell now are tales of betrayal, of cruelty, of the triumph of the strong over the weak. Our heroes are no longer the wise viziers and the pious kings. They are the cunning bandits and the ruthless warlords. The decline in the quality of our funerary arts is particularly telling. The tombs of our ancestors were not just graves. They were complex theological machines designed to launch the soul into a perfect and eternal afterlife. The crude, hastily built tombs of today reflect a deep uncertainty about the next world. If we can no longer build a proper house for the dead, what hope do we have for their eternal survival? The magic that once permeated our world has been replaced by a grim and gritty reality. We no longer see the hand of the gods in the turning of the seasons or the flooding of the Nile. we see only a series of random, chaotic events that we are powerless to control. The world has been disenchanted, stripped of its divine mystery. It is a much colder, much harsher place to live. I look at the art and architecture of my ancestors, and I'm filled with a profound sense of inadequacy. They were giants, men who thought in terms of centuries and who commanded the resources of a nation united in its purpose. I am a pygmy, ruling over a shattered kingdom, struggling to complete a single, third-rate tomb. The gulf between their achievements and my own is a measure of our fall. This cultural decay is not a symptom of our collapse. It is the collapse itself. A kingdom is not just a collection of people and territory. It is a shared idea, a collective dream. When that dream fades, when the idea loses its power, the physical kingdom inevitably crumbles. The crude statues and the illiterate scribblings are the death certificate of the old kingdom. We are becoming a people without a past, for we are losing the skills to understand it. We are becoming a people without a future, for we have lost the will to create it. We are trapped in a bleak and brutal present, a cultural wasteland from which there seems to be no escape. The legacy of our age will be one of loss, a cautionary tale of a great civilization that simply forgot how to be great. If you're enjoying this historical decline, please subscribe for more. Your subscription helps us to maintain our own crumbling archives and to pay the one scribe we have left who still remembers how to write incomplete sentences. Click the button and invest in the preservation of a quality of content that is rapidly becoming a lost art in this kingdom. As if the internal agonies of famine, rebellion, and a silent heaven were not enough to occupy my time, the periphery of our once great empire has begun to fray like an old linen sheet. While we have been diligently focused on our own spectacular implosion, our neighbors have noticed that the master of the house is distracted. The mighty walls and fortified borders that once struck fear into the hearts of foreign chieftains are now little more than lines drawn in the sand, and the desert winds are beginning to blow strange, unwelcome faces into our lands. In the golden age of my ancestors, the lands beyond the Nile Valley were a source of tribute, trade, and slaves. We were the center of the world, and the lesser peoples of the deserts and the grasslands knew their place. Our armies could march forth at a moment's notice to crush any hint of insolence, to remind the Libyans to the west and the Asiatics to the east that the might of Egypt was absolute. Now the roles are being reversed. We are the ones who are weak, and the vultures are beginning to circle. The most immediate problem comes from the east, from the endless shifting sands of the Sinai. The Bedouins, or as we have always called them, the Amu, have for centuries been a minor nuisance, a collection of scruffy nomadic tribes who occasionally raided a remote outpost before melting back into the desert. We built a series of fortifications, the walls of the ruler, to keep them in their place. These walls, however, were manned by soldiers, and soldiers, as I have repeatedly discovered, require food. Our border guards, they're mostly busy trying not to starve. The invaders usually just walk in. Very informal, really. The once proud garrisons that manned our eastern frontier have been decimated by desertions and famine. The remaining soldiers are gaunt, demoralized figures who are more likely to trade their spears for a loaf of bread than to stand against a determined incursion. The mighty walls of the ruler have become a porous membrane, a series of crumbling mud-brick forts manned by ghosts. And so the Amu come. They are not a conquering army with a grand strategy of conquest. They are opportunists, driven by the same desperation that grips my own people. They see a land in chaos, its defenses unmanned, its granaries, however empty, still more promising than their own barren wasteland. They come in small raiding parties, sweeping into the Nile Delta, looting what they can and disappearing before any organized resistance can be mounted. Their raids are a constant low-grade infection that saps our strength and morale. They attack the outlying villages, murdering the farmers, stealing the livestock, and carrying off the women and children. They disrupt what little trade still flows through the eastern desert. They are a physical manifestation of our loss of control, a constant reminder that we can no longer even protect our own doorstep. The people of the Delta, who are already suffering from famine and the breakdown of order, must now also live in fear of these foreign marauders. From the west, the Libyans, the Tiegenu, and the Tiemhu have also taken notice of our weakness. For centuries we have considered them little more than a collection of primitive tribes, their warriors easily dispatched by our disciplined armies. We would occasionally launch a punitive expedition into their lands, returning with thousands of captives and vast herds of cattle, just to remind them of their place in the world. Now, it is they who are on the offensive. Like the AMU, they are not a unified force. They are a collection of clans and tribes, each seeking to take advantage of our internal chaos. They pour across the western desert, their raiding parties striking deep into the fertile lands of the Fayoum and the western delta. They are a phantom menace, their movements as unpredictable as the desert winds. They appear, they plunder, they vanish, leaving behind a trail of destruction and fear. My ability to respond to these incursions is, to put it mildly, limited. I have no standing army to speak of. The few loyal troops I have are needed to maintain a semblance of control in the capital and to protect my own person from the increasingly restive populace. I cannot afford to dispatch a large force to chase shadows in the desert, a force that would likely desert or be annihilated by a combination of enemy action and starvation. The defense of the frontiers has, by default, fallen to the local Nomarchs, and they, in their infinite ambition, have seized upon this new crisis as yet another opportunity to enhance their own power. They use the threat of foreign invasion to justify the expansion of their private armies, to levy new taxes on their already impoverished subjects, and to portray themselves as the sole protectors of the people. They fight not for the glory of Egypt, but for the security of their own petty kingdoms. This has led to a bizarre and fragmented defense of the realm. A nomarch in the western delta might successfully repel a Libyan raid, an achievement he will then trumpet in a series of self-aggrandizing inscriptions in his personal tomb, but his victory does nothing to help the neighboring nome, which might be overrun the following week. There is no coordination, no national strategy. It is every warlord for himself. In some cases, the nomarchs have even been known to strike deals with the invaders. A particularly cynical lord might allow a band of Amu to pass through his territory unmolested, on the condition that they go and raid the lands of his rival. They are using these foreign marauders as proxies in their own internal power struggles, a treacherous game that further destabilizes the entire region. To the south, in Nubia, the situation is slightly different, but no less troubling. For centuries we have dominated the lands of Upper and Lower Nubia, exploiting their rich gold mines and using their people as soldiers and servants. Our control was absolute, enforced by a series of massive fortresses at the cataracts of the Nile. These fortresses, like their counterparts in the east, are now undermanned and undersupplied. The Nubians, a proud and warlike people, have not failed to notice this. They are beginning to stir, to throw off the yoke of Egyptian domination. The flow of gold from the south, which was once a vital component of the royal economy, has all but ceased. The local Nubian chieftains are reasserting their independence, and there is little I can do to stop them. We have lost control of one of our most valuable colonies, not through military defeat, but through simple neglect. These external pressures, while not the primary cause of our collapse, are a powerful accelerant. They are like salt poured into the open wounds of our internal strife. They create more chaos, more fear, and more instability. They further stretch our already depleted resources, and they provide yet another excuse for the nomarchs to defy the central government. The psychological impact of these invasions is also significant. We have always seen ourselves as a superior civilization, protected by our gods and our deserts from the savage hordes that surround us. To be so easily penetrated, so casually plundered by peoples we have always despised, is a profound national humiliation. It is another sign that the gods have truly abandoned us, that our special place in the world has been revoked. The presence of these foreigners on our sacred soil has also led to a new wave of xenophobia and paranoia. The common people, already suffering from a myriad of misfortunes, now have a new, easily identifiable scapegoat for their troubles. Any stranger with a foreign accent or an unfamiliar style of dress is viewed with suspicion and hostility. This has led to outbreaks of violence against the many foreigners who have lived peacefully in our cities for generations. The irony is that many of these invaders are not warriors but refugees. The same climatic changes that have caused our Nile to fail have also turned their own lands into uninhabitable deserts. They come to Egypt not to conquer but to survive. They are starving families, searching for water and pasture, just like my own people who wander the land in search of a scrap of food. But in our fear and our misery, we see not fellow sufferers, but a foreign threat. The administrative challenge of dealing with this influx of people is, of course, completely beyond our current capabilities. We have no system for processing refugees, no resources to feed them, no land to settle them on. They are simply absorbed into the general chaos, swelling the ranks of the landless, the desperate, and the disaffected. They are another volatile ingredient thrown into the bubbling cauldron of our collapse. The long-term consequences of this demographic shift are hard to predict. These Asiatics and Libyans are settling in the delta, mixing with the local population and creating new hybrid communities. They are changing the very fabric of our society, a process that is as unstoppable as it is unsettling. The pure, homogeneous Egypt of my ancestors is being transformed into something new, something different, something I neither understand nor control. My ancestors would have responded to these threats with overwhelming force. They would have built new forts, raised new armies, and launched brutal campaigns that would have left the deserts littered with the corpses of our enemies. I am reduced to writing strongly worded letters to Nomarchs who may or may not be in my employ, urging them to do something about the problem, and receiving in return either silence or a list of demands for more resources that I do not have. The world is shrinking. The protective bubble of our deserts has burst. We are no longer an isolated, self-contained civilization. We are now part of a larger, more chaotic world, a world in which we are no longer the dominant power. This is a terrifying new reality for a people who have always believed themselves to be the center of the universe. So as you huddle in your homes, praying that the famine does not take you and the rebels do not find you, you must now also listen for the unfamiliar footstep in the night, the foreign tongue in the marketplace. The catalogue of our miseries is now complete. We are not just at war with ourselves, we are at war with the world, and we are losing on all fronts. Help us understand these ancient woes. Subscribe now. By subscribing, you help us to fund our new, very understaffed Department of Foreign Annoyances. Your support allows us to at least document the various ways in which our borders are being informally redrawn. Don't let our geopolitical relevance fade completely. Click the subscribe button and become a patron of a failing state's intelligence-gathering operations. In the grand theatre of monarchy, the most important role an actor can play is that of a king who is in complete control. The costume must be immaculate, the lines delivered with unwavering conviction, and the stage managed to perfection. This is true even when the theatre is on fire, the audience is rioting, and the script has been replaced with a litany of our collective failures. Every day, I wake and don the mask of divine authority. It is the most challenging and most absurd performance of my life. The rituals of my office, once profound acts of cosmic significance, have become a desperate form of political stagecraft. I still perform the daily ceremonies in the state temples, offering a sliver of my own meager rations to the stone gods who refuse to answer. The priests and I go through the motions. Our chants and gestures are well-rehearsed play for an audience of none. We are upholding our end of a bargain that the other party has long since abandoned, hoping that if we pretend hard enough, the universe might just decide to play along again. The issuing of royal decrees has become a particularly farcical exercise. My scribes and I spend hours crafting magnificent pronouncements written in the most majestic and archaic language. We issue edicts commanding the Nomarchs to send their overdue taxes, ordering the rebels to lay down their arms, and instructing the Nile to please, for the love of all that is holy, rise to its proper level. These scrolls are then dispatched with great ceremony into a void of prayers, not commands, dressed up in the language of power. and still make the grand speeches. I still wear the double crown. It's just the echoes in the empty halls are getting louder, and the crown keeps slipping. I hold audiences in the great hall of the palace, my throne elevated on a dais, my remaining courtiers arranged in a carefully orchestrated display of reverence. I receive reports from officials who control nothing, and I dispense wisdom to subjects who no longer listen. It is a pageant of power, a meticulously crafted illusion designed to convince ourselves more than anyone else that the center still holds. The propaganda we carve into the few remaining public spaces is a masterclass in wishful thinking. While the reality is one of famine and civil war, the reliefs depict me as a mighty sphinx, trampling our enemies underfoot. The inscriptions speak of a land overflowing with abundance, of a people united in their love for their pharaoh. We are not just misrepresenting the truth, we are engaged in open warfare with it. History, I have decided, is far too important to be left to the historians. It must be managed. Maintaining the physical illusion of divine majesty is a daily struggle. The double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt is surprisingly heavy, a constant physical reminder of the weight of a kingdom I no longer truly rule. The royal regalia, the crook and the flail, the false beard, the layers of fine linen, are hot and cumbersome. They are the vestments of a god, but they feel like the costume of a court jester, one whose only joke is the vast and tragic gulf between his appearance and his reality. The great festivals of the religious calendar, the most challenging performances of all. We recently celebrated the festival of Opet, a grand procession meant to symbolize the renewal of the bond between the gods and the king. In previous generations, it was a magnificent spectacle of music, feasting, and national unity. This year, it was a rather sad little parade through the streets of the capital, flanked by nervous, hungry-looking guards, while the few citizens who bothered to watch stared at us with a mixture of apathy and contempt. The gods, presumably, were unimpressed. We even considered celebrating a Cid festival, the royal jubilee meant to rejuvenate the king's powers after 30 years on the throne. The preparations for this, the most potent of all royal rituals, are immense, requiring vast resources and a kingdom at peace. My advisors assured me that a successful jubilee would magically restore order and prosperity. I pointed out that we could not even afford the requisite number of sacrificial oxen, and that the running of the core portion of the ritual would likely be interrupted by a bread riot. The idea was quietly shelved. The struggle to maintain the illusion extends to my own family. I must present my son and heir as the future ruler of a strong and stable kingdom, even as I know I am bequeathing him a poisoned chalice. We go through the motions of his royal education, teaching him the titles he may never hold and the duties he may never perform. He is a young boy, but there is no escaping the shadow of our failure. I see it in his eyes. He is learning the first and most important lesson of modern kingship, how to pretend. The few foreign dignitaries who still make the perilous journey to my court are treated to a carefully managed theatrical experience. They are guided through the most intact parts of the palace, entertained by the healthiest-looking dancing girls we can find, and fed from the secret royal reserve. We put on a brave face, assuring them that the rumors of our demise are greatly exaggerated. I am not sure they are convinced, especially when they can hear the faint sounds of rioting from beyond the palace walls. This entire performance is utterly exhausting. The mental and emotional energy required to live this lie, to constantly project an aura of calm and control while my world is disintegrating, is immense. There are moments in the dead of night when the mask slips. I sit alone in my chambers, and I am not the son of Ra, the Lord of the Two Lands. I am just a man, a frightened, powerless man, crushed by the weight of a legacy I can no longer uphold. But then the sun rises, and the performance must begin anew, for what is the alternative? To openly admit my impotence? To stand before my people and confess that the gods have abandoned us? That I have no plan? That we are all doomed? That is not the role of a pharaoh. A pharaoh's duty is to be the fixed point in a turning world, the embodiment of hope, even when all hope is lost. My personal despair is a luxury I cannot afford. The people, I suspect, are not as fooled by this charade as my advisors seem to think. They see the reality of their own lives, the emptiness of their own stomachs. But perhaps they too have a need for the illusion. Perhaps the sight of their pharaoh, still dressed in the ancient regalia, still performing the sacred rituals, provides a sliver of comfort, a reminder of a better time, a suggestion that the cosmic order has not been completely shattered. Perhaps we are all complicit in this grand, desperate act of make-believe. The Nomarchs, of course, are not fooled at all. They see my propaganda for what it is, the desperate flailing of a drowning man. In fact, they have learned from it. They now produce their own crude imitations of my royal inscriptions, their own local festivals celebrating their own local power. We are engaged in a war of propaganda, a battle of illusions, each of us trying to convince the world that our particular fiction is the true one. The breakdown of reality has become so complete that it is sometimes hard to distinguish between the performance and the truth. I will deliver a powerful speech, full of confidence and divine authority, and for a fleeting moment I will believe it myself. I will feel the power of my ancestors flowing through me, and I will be convinced that I can, by sheer force of will, restore order to the universe. Then I will return to my chambers, and the illusion will shatter, leaving behind only the bitter taste of my own futility. The financial cost of maintaining this facade is, of course, ruinous. The gold leaf, the fine linen, the imported incense, it all must be paid for. Every decree written on a fresh sheet of papyrus is a sheet that could have been used for something more practical, like a food ration list. We are literally burning through our last remaining resources to maintain appearances. It is the ultimate act of fiscal irresponsibility, and it is absolutely essential to my survival. The true audience for this performance, I have come to realize, is not the people, nor the Nomarchs, nor even the gods. The true audience is history. I am playing a role for the scribes of the future, for the archaeologists who will one day sift through the ruins of my kingdom. I want them to know that even in the face of utter collapse, the last pharaoh of this line did not flinch. He upheld the rituals. He wore the crown, he played the part, right up to the bitter end. This obsession with appearances, with the outward symbols of power, is perhaps the defining characteristic of our decline. We have lost the substance of our greatness, so we cling desperately to its shadow. We can no longer build real pyramids, so we build pyramids of words. We can no longer control our kingdom, so we control the narrative. It is a pathetic but deeply human response to a crisis that is beyond our comprehension. The gap between the official version of reality and the lived experience of my people has become a chasm. They hear my decrees promising stability and prosperity, and then they return to their homes to face the reality of starvation and violence. This cognitive dissonance is unsustainable. Sooner or later, they will be forced to choose which reality they believe in, and I fear they will not choose mine. The rituals themselves have begun to feel corrupted, their meaning twisted by the desperation of our circumstances. A prayer for a good harvest becomes an indictment of the gods' failure. A festival of unity becomes a showcase of our division. The sacred has been made profane by the sheer, overwhelming force of our misery. We are actors who have forgotten our lines, adrift on a stage that is no longer set. And yet we continue. We must continue. The performance is all we have left. It is our last defiant gesture against the encroaching chaos. It is our assertion that even in the darkest of nights, the memory of the sun still matters. We will continue to play the part of a great and powerful kingdom, even as we are being erased from the map. So I will go on making my grand speeches. I will go on wearing my heavy crown. I will go on pretending to be the master of a universe that has slipped from my grasp. It is a lonely, thankless, and ultimately doomed task, but it is my duty, and a pharaoh, even a failed one, must always do his duty. Keep the illusion alive. Like and subscribe. Your support helps to fund the Royal Propaganda Department and ensures that our decrees continue to be issued on the highest quality papyrus. In a world of crumbling realities, a strong narrative is all that matters. Click that button and become a patron of the pharaonic fiction. Here, at the twilight of all things, one expects a grand, cataclysmic finale, a mighty battle, a foreign conquest, a dramatic last stand in the hallowed halls of the palace. Our poets and scribes, should any survive, will no doubt invent such fictions to make our end more palatable, more heroic. But I, who have had a front-row seat to this slow-motion car crash of a kingdom, can tell you the truth. The old kingdom is not ending with a bang, it is ending with a long, drawn-out and profoundly undignified whimper. There will be no final day of reckoning, no single moment of defeat, because we were not defeated, we simply dissolved. We are like a sandcastle, built with great pride and precision, that has been left to the slow, inexorable work of the wind and the tide. The sharp lines have blurred, the towers have slumped, and the individual grains of sand are scattering to form new, smaller, and far less impressive dunes. It is a quiet, granular, and deeply embarrassing apocalypse. We didn't fall, we simply decentralized. Permanently and violently. It's very fashionable these days, apparently. The strong, centralized state that was the glory of my ancestors has evaporated, leaving behind a patchwork of squabbling, self-important little fiefdoms. The Nomarchs, my former governors, now style themselves as kings of their own provinces, their authority absolute within their own little patch of dirt. The concept of a unified Egypt has become a quaint historical notion. The irony is that many of the old structures remain, like the skeleton of a great beast long since picked clean by vultures. The tax offices in the provinces are still there, only now they collect for a local warlord, not for the pharaoh. The temples still stand, but the priests now offer prayers for the health of their regional master. The bureaucracy, that great and terrible engine of our state, still functions, but it now serves dozens of petty tyrants instead of one divine king. My own position has become the ultimate absurdity. I am the pharaoh of the two lands, but I control little more than the capital city and its immediate surroundings. My kingdom is a concept, a memory, an idea that no longer corresponds to any physical reality. I am the high priest of a national religion that no longer has a nation. I am the shepherd of a flock that has scattered to the four winds. My titles are grand, my power is non-existent. This slow dissolution is in many ways more terrifying than a swift conquest. A conquest is an event, a trauma that can be overcome, a wrong that can one day be righted. But how do you fight against entropy? How do you rally an army against a gradual decline in administrative efficiency? There is no single enemy to point your spear at, no clear evil to vanquish. There is only the slow, creeping rot of our own internal failures. The era that will follow this one, and I am under no illusions that my dynasty will be a part of it, will be known as a time of chaos. The scribes will call it an intermediate period, a polite and academic term for a bloody free-for-all. For decades, perhaps even centuries, the various regional powers will fight amongst themselves. The Nomarchs of the north will war with the Nomarchs of the south. Alliances will be forged and broken. The land will bleed. Two major power centers are already beginning to emerge from this chaos. In the north, the rulers of Heracleopolis have declared themselves the legitimate successors to my throne, a claim that is as audacious as it is flimsy. In the south, a family of ambitious nomarchs from a previously insignificant town called Thebes is beginning to consolidate its power. The stage is being set for a long and brutal civil war, and the prize will be the hollowed-out shell of my former kingdom. And the people, the common, long-suffering people of this land, will be the ones who pay the highest price for the ambitions of these new masters. They will be conscripted into armies, taxed into oblivion, and caught in the crossfire of battles that have nothing to do with their own interests. They will trade the distant, ineffective rule of a single pharaoh for the immediate, brutal oppression of a dozen petty kings. This is the progress we have bequeathed them. The dream of a unified, eternal Egypt, the dream that built the pyramids, is dead. It was a beautiful dream, a powerful dream, a dream that held us together for 1,000 years. But it was, in the end, just a dream. The reality is that we are a river people, a collection of communities bound together by a single vital artery. When that artery faltered, the body politic fell apart. It was as simple and as tragic as that. I spend my days now in a state of profound nostalgia. I walk through the halls of my palace, I study the reliefs depicting the triumphs of my ancestors, and I try to remember what it felt like to be the ruler of a great and powerful nation. It feels like a story someone once told me, a myth from a forgotten age. The disconnect between that glorious past and our miserable present is a chasm that can never be bridged. The silence of the gods, which was once a source of terror and confusion, has now become a kind of cold comfort. Their indifference makes sense now. They have simply moved on. They are gods of great and powerful kingdoms, and we are no longer either of those things. Our prayers are like letters sent to an old address, returned to sender, stamped with the words, "No longer at this location." My own preparations for the afterlife have taken on a new, more urgent and more pathetic quality. My half-finished, shoddily constructed tomb is a testament to my diminished state. But I persist, for what else is there to do? My kingdom in this world is lost. My only hope is that my kingdom in the next will be more successful. Given my recent track record, however, I am not optimistic. The slow, grinding nature of our collapse means there will be no clear endpoint. The old kingdom will not be a chapter that closes, but a page that slowly fades to illegibility. Future generations will argue about when, exactly, it ended. Was it with the failure of the Nile? With the rise of the Nomarchs? With the death of the last pharaoh to control the entire country? They will miss the point. It ended when we lost faith in the idea of it. I am the ghost of a dead empire, haunting the halls of my own palace. I am a living anachronism, a relic of an age that has passed into history while I am still breathing its dusty air. The world has moved on, but I am still here, trapped in the amber of my own obsolete divinity. It is a lonely and deeply strange existence. The final realization is this: an empire is not stone and gold. It is not armies and borders. It is a story, a shared narrative that a people tells itself. Our story was that we were the chosen people, the eternal kingdom, the center of the universe. For a long time it was a very good story. But we have reached the final chapter, and the ending is not a happy one. The legacy I leave behind is one of chaos and division. I will be remembered not as a great builder, but as the king who presided over the dissolution. My name will be a footnote in the long, sad story of the first intermediate period. It is not the legacy I would have chosen, but it is the one I have earned. The gods are silent, the people are suffering, and the kingdom is no more. What advice can I offer to the future kings who will one day rise from these ashes? I would tell them this: do not put your faith in monuments of stone. Do not believe that your power is absolute or that your covenant with the gods is unbreakable. And, for the love of all that is holy, pay attention to the river. The river is everything. So this is how it ends. Not with a bang, but with the scratching of a scribe's reed pen, documenting the slow, methodical disintegration of a world. With the quiet shuffle of a pharaoh pacing the empty halls of his palace, a king with no subjects, a god with no believers, with the faint, distant sound of a kingdom whimpering its last. I look out from my balcony over the city of Memphis. The sun is setting, casting long shadows over the monuments of my ancestors. A new age is dawning, an age of darkness and uncertainty. My time is over. The time of Egypt as we knew it is over. The silence that follows this broadcast will be the silence of the end. This is the final broadcast. The illusion can no longer be maintained. The stage is dark. The actors have gone home. All that remains is the truth of our failure, a truth as vast and as empty as the desert that now surrounds us on all sides. The story is over. Do not miss the tragic final act. Subscribe to our channel. This may be the end of our kingdom, but it is not the end of our story. By subscribing, you ensure that the lessons of our monumental failure will be preserved for all time. Be a witness to the end of an era. Click that button and watch with us as the lights go out on the age of the pyramids. And so we come to it. The end of the broadcast, if not yet the end of the world. Though, from my vantage point, the two are beginning to look remarkably similar. The dust of our shattered glory settles in the throne room, and the silence from the heavens is, as ever, perfectly, maddeningly clear. We have journeyed together through the anatomy of our collapse, a guided tour of our own implosion. We have seen a river forget its sacred duty, a people forget their sacred obedience, and a pantheon of gods forget their own mailing address. It has been, if nothing else, educational. I have spoken of famine, of fields cracked and barren like the skin of a mummy. I have detailed the horrors of hunger, where a man's loyalty is sold for a crust of bread, and morality becomes a luxury item. We have witnessed the bonds of family and community dissolve into a desperate, primal struggle for survival. We have seen the great granaries, our proudest monuments to foresight, become hollow tombs echoing with the ghosts of harvests past. The very land has turned against us, and we have been left to reap the bitter harvest of our own impotence. I have recounted the tale of our political decay, the slow, cancerous growth of the Nomarchs from loyal governors into petty, ambitious warlords. We saw how the sinews of central authority were cut one by one until the great body of Egypt was left a paralyzed, twitching corpse. I, your pharaoh, became a king of concepts, a ruler of maps, my decrees vanishing into a void of regional defiance. The lesson, it seems, is that power, like water, will always flow downhill, and my hill has become distressingly flat. We have waded through the blood and chaos of rebellion. We saw how the quiet desperation of the starving masses finally erupted into a furious, nihilistic rage. The pitchforks of the farmers, once used to turn the fertile earth, were turned against the very officials meant to protect them. We saw our divine armies melt away, their bellies as empty as their belief in my cause. Law and order became abstract notions, historical curiosities in a land ruled by the mob and the sword. Most profoundly, we have stared together into the terrifying abyss of the gods' silence. We have explored the crisis of faith that strikes a god-king when his gods stop answering his calls. We prayed, we sacrificed, we built mountains of stone in their honor, and in return we received the cosmic equivalent of a cold shoulder. This silence has been the most corrosive poison of all, eating away at the very soul of our civilization, leaving behind a husk of ritual and a heart full of doubt. This kingdom, this great and ancient land of Kemet, is not dying from a single dramatic wound. It is succumbing to 1,000 smaller cuts, a slow, inglorious bleed-out. The old kingdom, the age of the pyramid builders, is over. It did not fall. It simply evaporated, leaving behind a vacuum that is now being filled by chaos, ambition, and the dust of ages. What comes next is a story for another, and likely more brutal, time. And so, as the sun of Ra sets on another day of existential dread, this has been Pharaoh Merare, your humble and profoundly stressed voice from the crumbling glory of the old kingdom. We saw the Nile betray us, the people rise up, and the gods remain utterly, divinely silent. If this desperate transmission from the depths of history has illuminated the grim humor of cosmic irony for you, or perhaps made you appreciate your own era's functioning irrigation systems, then my existence has served its purpose. Keep listening, keep questioning, and for the sake of Ma'at, if she's still listening, keep that subscribe button pressed, because even when empires turn to sand, the stories persist until the next broadcast. If this ancient contraption doesn't break, may your granaries be full and your Nomarchs obedient. Sighs, then static overtakes the voice entirely, fading into a vast, empty silence.